People keep making these Instagram mistakes that are killing their growth potential. The first Instagram mistake I see is, this applies regardless if you have a small account or if you have a large account. First mistake I see is not trusting themselves enough to come up with original content. Yes, you can take inspiration from other creators, but if you think about the top creators in your industry, do they copy or do they lead, which means other people copy what they do? The top creators in whatever industry are the leaders, and then we have all these other people who are following, and they are doing exactly whatever that top leader is doing. There is an exception here. If you're just starting out and you haven't found your voice yet, you haven't found like what is your style, you perhaps haven't figured out what do I actually want to make content around, or what do I actually want to do, blah 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 blah, all of that, then it can actually be very, very helpful to try to make content like someone else is doing, because one, you'll develop your skills, two, you will also figure out, is this something I enjoy? Is this something I can see myself doing, etc., etc. So when you are learning, it's really, really great to look at other creators who are doing it well and then try to do that yourself. As an example, now that I'm getting into YouTube, to get started, I am using the scripts of Vanessa Lau, because I know because her YouTube videos are really great. She's doing so great on the platform. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try her script to get started, to get some structure to get started. And then eventually I'm going to evolve and I'm going to find my own voice in all this. Right now, I don't have that much experience making YouTube videos. So by looking at how other people do it, that gives me an opportunity to try and see what works for me. And what can and then also in time develop my own style. You can also take inspiration from other creators. Let's say you have two creators and you're like, oh, I really like that piece of content that person is making. And perhaps you have these other creators as well, like, oh, I really like what this person is making, like they have a specific style of content that I really like. Can I take the concept and create a new concept out of those two different content pieces? This is something I have done on my big account, Matt Cutters, a few times, where I've seen, okay, I really like that content, I really like that content. Can I create something new? Can I create something different with this type of content? So for example, one thing I did was I took inspiration from a picture and a style of reel that I saw, okay, this is working really well, and I mashed it together to my own thing. That format worked really, really well, and it came out unique. If you want people to follow you, you need to be the leader. You cannot act like a follower. To get ahead of the game, you need to develop your own style of doing things. The next mistake I see content creators make on Instagram is they never change their content. They never renew themselves. And this is something I see among small creators, but also big creators. This is what I have found to be the thing that determines if an account is going to be successful in the long run, or if they're gonna stagnate. So for example, if you are one of the leaders in the space, like you've grown your following, this is really good. Even if you're a small creator, you have to take this into account, because this can literally save your future account or break it. So let's say you're one of the leaders in your space. Example, like with my account, you can definitely say I was a leader in that space. So what I did is I had this reel format. I came up with my own content style and I posted that, and it performed really, really well. Now, after some time, other people in that industry noticed that, oh, well, Jessica's reels are performing really, really well. Perhaps I should do something similar to that. So when you have the leader up here who's creating something, all these other people, they're gonna start jumping on that content piece, and eventually that content piece is not gonna be that unique anymore. So after some time, you have to renew yourself if you wanna keep growing and keep staying at the top, basically. Like as a content creator and a business owner, or you know, whatever you're up to, you're going to evolve over time. Like you are going to evolve as a person. But if your account don't evolve with you, if you're still talking about the exact same things you did 3 years ago, people are gonna get bored. People I have seen who has had rapid growth, they become successful and then they stagnate, is because they never change. They keep posting and talking about the exact same things. They never renew themselves, and the people who get ahead, they renew themselves, and as they develop, as they grow, so does their content. So this is important. You have to keep renewing yourself occasionally, or you're gonna get stuck and get left behind. Now, before we move on to the next mistake, one of the most basic steps of building a successful Instagram account is nailing down your profile. So having an optimized profile so that when people come to visit you, they actually convert into followers. And this is one of the first steps I and my clients go through when we set up their account. Right now, you can grab my 100K profile formula, and this is the information you get in a paid course. So it's a step-by-step in-depth guide to optimize your profile. So grab it in the description box below. Moving on to the next step I see content creators make on Instagram is they're letting their emotions get in the way of reaching success. And this is one of the hardest things for me as well. As humans, this is, unless you're like a psychopath or anything, this is going to be something that you always have to dabble with and like struggle with a bit. But as time passes, you should be able to handle your emotions better and make better decisions. So for example, it could be like you have a lot of insecurities that prevents you from doing X, Y, Z. Perhaps you have insecurities that prevents you from showing up on camera, or taking that leap and doing X, Y, Z, or changing your content a bit, or whatever it can be. You may have imposter syndrome, you may have doubt yourself, you may compare yourself to other creators, the list goes on and on and on. These are things that are going to stop you from getting where you want to be. Or it could also be emotional things like, I don't feel like it. If you decide, okay, you know what, I'm not gonna do whatever, blah, 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 it takes to reach success because I don't feel like it, or because whatever it can be, you know, that's gonna be on you. Is it worth I don't feel like it? Because you're gonna have to learn to do things that you don't like, that you don't enjoy very much, or if you like, when I don't feel motivated, or I'm having a bad day. Like if you're having a bad day, or you skip going to work, like if you are, you know, you have to treat this in the same way. You can't just like, I don't feel like it, and then not do it. Like you gotta fucking do it. When you're moving to the next level, you need to leave your past self and turn into this new, better version of yourself. It can be really, really hard, especially also if you feel like you want to move forward, and then you have all these other people trying to pull you back, like, no, stay here, I want you to stay here, and they put labels on you. So for example, this is a problem I have had for a very long time. So people, they really want to label me and put me in the category of continuing with my sewing and blah, 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 and my sewing account and the designing and all that. And I've been trying to get away from it. And I've noticed how hard it can be when also not only you have your own conflicting emotions, but you have other people also putting these labels on you and try to pull you back, or you shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. You should be in here because you're really good at it. Well, yeah, but I want to move on. So that can also be super, super hard to get out of that. You have to really separate the emotions from the outcome. And a good way to do this is do not take action or act when you're in a sort of like panic mode. So example, if you're having a fight with your partner or whatever, when you are very upset, when you're in those very overwhelming emotions, that's not going to be a great place to have a discussion, you know, because it's probably going to make it a lot worse. It's the same thing when you're making decisions for if it's your business or whatever, you know, your account or blah, 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 blah. If you're in that kind of like really emotional state, you're most likely going to make a really bad decision. So it's better to take a step back, calm yourself down, so you can actually see things more from a logical standpoint. And you can also even write a list of, okay, this is option 1, this is option 2, what are the perks, or what are like the good things or the benefits, and what are the bad things, and blah, 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 and then compare it that way. Really think long term and not only short term. This is another mistake I see a lot of people make, and I include myself. When I started out, like, I thought thinking long term was, I don't know. So now I think way more long term than I do short term. So when I started out, like just thinking a year ahead for me was like really difficult. Like I was just more like kind of here and now. But now I'm like, okay, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Like you have to think how the things you do today affect you long term. The next step content creators make on Instagram, and this may be a little hard to swallow for some people, is their ego mindset. I, me, myself, and I. I know that was wrong, but you're thinking everything from an ego perspective, and you're probably not aware of it that you're doing it. I did the exact same thing when I started out, and I wasn't even aware of it. Like, it wasn't until later on I realized, okay, my mindset was all wrong. Like, so explain it. So to explain it to you, when I opened my first Instagram account in 2017, tried to be a mom influencer. I was like seeing all these other new mom influencers, like, oh, that's really cool, you know, that seems pretty easy, I can do that too. Well, it turns out it wasn't that easy, and no matter what I did, no one liked my posts, no one like engaged with me, no one blah, blah, blah. Like, I couldn't get people to be interested in what I was doing, and I just couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I kept at it for a full year before I was like, okay, that's enough, I'm gonna close this account. Opened another account a bit later on. My mindset completely different. So instead of thinking of why aren't I getting any likes, why aren't anyone following me, why doesn't anything work, like what am I doing wrong, blah blah blah, like these kind of like victimizing ego thinking. So instead of thinking that, I was like, okay, what value can I provide to my audience? And every time I shared something, I was like, okay, what can I share that could be valuable for my audience? Huge mindset shift. So taking the focus away from me, myself, and I to the audience I was posting for. And that also made a huge difference in the community I grew, and people being interested in my content, and also eventually sales. Like, you cannot think about you. And also, when you are making your content, like if it doesn't perform, it's probably because you're not good enough yet. And you have to be okay with that. Like, you're gonna suck when you start out, but that's okay. And like with my YouTube videos, they're probably gonna suck, but that's okay. Because if you don't suck, you can never be good. Like, you have to suck when you start out in order to be great later on, but you have to keep at it and you have to keep practicing. So most people, when they start out, they think they're a lot better than they actually are, and this is a tough pill to swallow. And I've seen this among clients as well. Like, this is something that people have a hard time getting over. It's their ego. And we all have to fight our ego, because it's going to get in the way of you reaching success. And the next mistake is, and this is one of the crucial strategy mistakes I see people make that prevents them from growing on Instagram, and that is they're a bit all over the place. And you have to remember, today, the landscape is so different today than it was a couple of years ago. So the most efficient way to grow today on Instagram is going to be very specific with your niche and very specific with one content style. So it's so niche, it's almost like you can pick that one format that works really well, and then you keep posting that. That's great for a growth strategy. Now, if you're gonna sell, if you're gonna do other things, you have to like build a community. There's other strategies and things you need to be aware of and take into consideration, because if you want to sell on your account, that's going to be a different strategy than growing your account. But let's talk about growth. So if you want to grow your account, because either way you'd have to have some sort of audience in order to sell something. So growth-wise, if you want to grow quickly, or if you want to have a more rapid growth, you need to hone in on that one thing that works really well. And yes, finding that thing can be sometimes tricky, but it can be done. Like, example with my content as well, like I found this one format that performed extremely well. I posted that, and then after some time I was like, okay, this is my like standard format I have that I post that perform well. And then I added some other pieces of content that I tested occasionally to see, you know, how is this performing, blah 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 blah. And I managed to find quite a few viral content formats that work really well. Also, with this mistake is being all over the place, is that people give up too soon, and they try something and they're like, it didn't work. And then they change completely. But in most cases, you don't have to change what you're doing completely. You just need to tweak what you're doing. So you just need to tweak it a little. And I have done a lot of like A/B testing on my big account to see how little tweaks can have a difference in how things perform, and how, like, okay, how much reach did you get, how much engagement, blah blah blah. And it can be so small things, like I changed the editing a little bit so it got a bit more engaging, and boom, it went from being average to going bloody viral. So little tweaks, don't like go too crazy with your changes just because something didn't work out. You haven't just mastered yet. You need to practice, you need to be patient. You are curious to know the exact strategy I used to grow my Instagram account from 0 to over 100K in just a year. I recommend you to watch this video where I break it down, the exact strategy I used. And actually the strategy is very simple. It's like ridiculously simple. What most people struggle with is actually implementing that strategy. But anyways, watch that video if you want to learn how I grew my following from 0 to 100K in just a year.